lobby. Let's all go to the lobby, lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello, horror hounds, and welcome to Now Slaying, an It Slays podcast production where we break down the latest and greatest in the world of horror. I'm your not-so-humble host, Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And today on the show, we're going to be reviewing The Unheard, which was released March 31st, 2023, exclusively on Shudder. But before we get into the discussion, Rowan, I want to know, have you seen this director's previous film, The Beach House? And then based off of that, were you looking forward to The Unheard?
So I've never seen The Beach House. I had seen on Letterboxd that you had seen it, and I guess when I saw the trailer for this, I was curious, and I was like, yeah, I gotta make sure to watch that, and then I never did. But I had seen that a lot of people kind of gave it like a pretty good review. So I was like, okay, like it seemed that people generally liked The Beach House.
Yeah, I think just like a general consensus, like just a little bit more positive on The Beach House than this movie, but still kind of, it's a slow burn, right?
Yeah.
Like I think from my recollection of The Beach House, it's been a couple of years, but it's one of those movies that it takes probably 60 minutes or so before anything really happens, or at least like the general thrust of the movie kind of reveals itself. But I remember being a little bit positive on it, at least, like thinking it was a good, directorial debut.
Yeah, so I mean, what kind of gravitated me to wanting to see this was Lachlan Watson, who I am familiar with because I was a big fan. She was one of the co-stars of Sabrina, the Teenage Witch on Netflix.
Okay.
And I was a big fan of that show, and I was interested in that, and so that's what drew me to this. What about you? Did you see the trailer or anything? Were you looking forward to this?
Yeah, I mean, this was something that was completely off my radar. Like, obviously, behind the scenes, you were the one that was kind of gunning for this. I'm completely unfamiliar with Lachlan Watson. Although I will say they were pretty good in this movie, I think. And also, I've been sick the last couple of days, so I haven't really been looking forward to much. I don't know if listeners can hear it in my voice or whatnot, but we had to delay this recording by a couple of days just because I wasn't feeling all that good. But like I said, I did enjoy The Beach House, so once I found that out, I was marginally interested in it. And also, I kind of creeped the guy's IMDb and saw that he was a location manager before turning to directing, and I'm currently working as an assistant location manager on, a bunch of different TV shows shooting around here. So, hopefully I can follow in this guy's footsteps and, make the jump from location manager to directing just like this guy.
You can make the jump from location manager to director of 2-hour and 10-minute long horror movies on Shudder.
There we go. Yeah, that's the career path I'm going for. But yeah, with that said, before we get into the discussion, into the review, let's just throw it on over to the trailer.
This is a stage 1 clinical trial. Right now, hearing loss is irreversible. The purpose of this study is to change that. I can hear, like, everything.
I know you. Your name's Chloe, right? We used to play together as kids.
My mom left when I was 8. Disappeared. It's the last time I remember really hearing anything. And I still hear her voice.
We looked for your mom. It was really hard to do.
This place, it does things to you.
I think something's wrong with the procedure. I'm hearing things. Things that aren't there. It's getting worse.
What are you hearing right now?
Chloe?
What you just heard is from The Unheard, directed by Jeffrey A. Brown and written by Michael and Sean Rasmussen, and the story is as follows. After undergoing an experimental procedure to restore her hearing, Chloe begins to suffer from auditory hallucinations related to the disappearance of her mother. Now, here on Now Slaying, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before getting into the more in-depth spoiler-filled discussion. So, Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on The Unheard?
So yeah, I mean, just from the description in the synopsis of it, to me, like, when I had heard about this, I was like very, very curious, because to me it sounded so 2000s. I was like, this sounded to me like a 2000s horror movie, the premise of it.
Yeah, like something like White Noise or Pulse or something like that. Just kind of like the analog horror era.
So I was excited for a mix of that with, you know, I think everyone now go to when we think about horror movie and deaf people is Hush.
Which I thought this was going in that direction for a little bit as well.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, is this just going to be Hush 2.0?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, if it had or not, I kind of would have been open to both. I think there's so many interesting things that you can do with, you know, with someone being deaf, especially just with like sound in a movie and stuff like that. So I was really intrigued by it. And now I'm sure we'll, you know, save lots for the spoiler section that this isn't Hush. Well, it kind of isn't. Yeah, not at all.
No, I wouldn't compare this to Hush. They're very different in terms of pacing as well. Other than the central conceit of your main character is deaf. It's, there's not too much, and I guess that they're in a house by themselves, I guess, you know, but that's spoiling too much. I mean, it's not Hush.
But I think, as you know, the listener listening to us has heard us use multiple times already, you need to kind of go into this with the word slow burn in your mind. Are you
like really slow burn? I couldn't get over it. It's one of those movies that it doesn't even reveal that Chloe is kind of like hearing things, like, you know, hints of, you know, what happened to her mother, or like some sort of analog influence, staticky hearing and whatnot, until I want to say 60 minutes into this movie. It's one of the things that should be revealed within the first 15 to 20 minutes, and it takes an hour to do so. I couldn't believe it. I was just literally like, what am I watching here? You know, I was like, well, what is the narrative thrust of this movie? I'm fine watching a movie about a woman kind of learning to hear, or like, you know, regaining her sense of hearing. It's not much of a horror movie if that's all we're watching.
Yeah, well, so that was kind of my main issue with it, because, you know, as you said, and it's kind of in the description, it's not really a spoiler, about these kind of like auditory hallucinations, they call them. It is like I didn't understand why we took so long to get to that, because I think we still could have had that 60-minute slow burn of her kind of, you know, exploring this house and kind of memories in this town that she hasn't been in since she was a kid. Like, you still could have had that slowness, but just with that little fact that we do know that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's such a strange thing to hold back on, because anybody coming to this movie that knows this is a horror movie about someone who's regaining their hearing, the baseline thing for you to expect from a movie like that is like good sound design and probably something creepy in the sound, or like them hearing something that normal people don't hear, right? That's like the baseline expectation. So the fact that this movie kind of takes 60 minutes or so to even bring that in, I was like, okay, that was the reveal, you know, like, you know, for most movies, that would be the midpoint twist, you know, that completely, you know, uproots everything that you've been watching the previous 60 minutes. But for this, it felt like it was the first beat of like the story, like the inciting incident just took 60 minutes to get there. It was baffling.
I don't think I found it as egregious as you. I didn't hate it. I think maybe also, like, I was just totally on board. I was, like, zoned in when I was watching the movie, and oddly, like, had a good viewing experience, even though I was at work with it. Okay. So,
nice. All right.
But I was able to, like, I was at work. I was, like, you know, I mean, I work at night, so it's quiet. But, like, I was able to, like, I had headphones in, like, actual full-out headphones.
Okay.
I will say there's, like, periods of this movie that I thought maybe I blew my eardrum.
Yeah, you know, some of the sound design definitely goes in that direction.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, like, I was just, like, totally immersed in it. And like I said, I didn't mind it. It really, you know, just kind of it reminded me of almost a time that has passed, not the 2000s, but maybe a little more like 8 years ago, because it really is like kind of this mumblecore type of film. Like this gave me that kind of vibe of a Lace Crater, like something like that, where
it's interesting that you got that vibe from it, because I actually found a lot of the dialogue to be really like stilted and kind of awkward, whereas usually in mumblecore, you know, it's almost like so authentic that it feels awkward because it shouldn't exist in a movie. So it's interesting that you kind of felt the polar opposite of me in like the script, I guess.
Yeah, no, like I said, I didn't mind it very much. A lot of the film, to me, I just thought, even stuff I didn't think worked, I thought, because Watson I thought she was really good in it, and I thought, like, she carries the movie, and I was very intrigued. Like I said, I was just very intrigued to see her performance, because it was so different from what I think everyone is used to them from of Sabrina, because I mean, Watson's kind of big thing is they're like a non-binary actress, and Sabrina, they play like a trans character. So it was kind of interesting, because those are the kind of roles that they gravitate to, where this, they just kind of like fully dived into like this more feminine female role.
Yeah, this is very much like a, you know, her, she, like pronouns, right? Like she's playing a female character 100% in this movie. But yeah, Lachlan's performance is great. You know, their performances, I have no issues with it really for the movie, other than, you know, some of the dialogue they were given, which isn't once again, it isn't their fault, you know.
And I will say, you know, retired ex-cop Hank, played by Nick Sandow. I'm always happy to see Nick Sandow.
I don't know if I recognize him, but I can't agree. I'm not a big fan of Hank in this movie or Josh, the other character. I think both of them are kind of bozos it was kind of like whenever they were occupying my screen, I felt like Mike. I was like, there's too many men in this movie. I'd rather just Lachlan Watson, and then even the doctor that they kind of interact with a little bit, I would have preferred a little bit more there.
Well, for me, I've talked about it on the main show before that Nick Sandow is he's a kind of a main supporting cast from Sons of Anarchy.
Oh, what character did he play? Because I watched like 5 or 6 seasons of Sons of Anarchy.
He played the cop. He was like the cop. Really? He was the cop that was in love with Jax's mom.
Oh, geez. Okay. All right. It's been too long. I never even recognized them.
I mean, the acting, I guess I kind of gave a pass, because stuff like The Doctor, when I was watching, I was looking at Letterboxd, and I saw, like, you know, The Doctor, this was the only thing they've ever acted in. So I was like, oh, this must have been, you know, just a tiny little production.
Yeah, this is definitely a smaller production. I mean, it's all basically takes place in one cabin and then some nondescript locations, right? And since the dude's a location manager, I'm sure he knows how to lock down, like, hey, we need a room that's gonna function as, you know, a doctor's office or a surgical room or something, right? Like, you just need kind of a sterile, empty space, basically.
And, I mean, obviously, I'm always terrible at the spoiler-free stuff, and I'm jumping around, but this does have a few twists and turns. But I will say, you know, without saying too much to give it away, to me, now, I'm not saying that it's on that level, but to me, the comparison to this isn't a Hush, but it's a Censor. I think this kind of, the description really does you a disservice going in thinking what this is about, where to me this really had a vibe of Censor. Just the subject matter, kind of. Maybe not subject matter, but the thing that is kind of central to this story isn't really necessarily sound.
Yeah, it's kind of the movie's relation to just analog.
Yeah.
You know, the way it's depicted visually or auditorially, it's very similar to Censor, and kind of how that kind of creeps in and affects the main character and their perception of reality, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, maybe that's why it worked for me a little bit, is because we all know I'm a sucker for analog stuff. So maybe it was just like tickling my funny bone a bit there.
You saw a VHS tape and you got excited.
Oh, I got excited. and especially like there was a gorgeous box set in the closet. It had like the brain who screamed or whatever the hell that movie's called.
The brain that wouldn't die.
The brain that wouldn't die. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't necessarily see what the other ones were, but I was like, well, that's a real movie. So I was like, the others must be real movies.
Yeah.
No copies of Independence Day though, so I don't know how.
No Shrek either. Shrek would have been big at that point in time on VHS. You know.
Yeah, like so I was a little disappointed. This isn't a real VHS family. But you know what? I'll let you talk a little bit. I will say for recommend, I think if you're okay with a 2-hour runtime, I would recommend
a little over 2 hours.
Yeah,
it's
is
like
a
2
little
hours
over
and
2
5
hours.
minutes, I think, or something. Yeah.
I would recommend it. I did have a pretty good time with it. I thought it was just interesting enough to kind of keep my interest. Once we kind of really got going, I really wanted to, you know, find out what was going on. You know, I'll wait for the spoiler section whether or not I thought the twist in this kind of worked. But I still thought, you know, it was a fun time watching. What are your like general spoiler-free thoughts and recommendation for this?
Yeah, I've kind of interjected a little bit when you were talking, so I've already kind of given some of my thoughts. But, you know, by and large, I think the movie technically is pretty competent. I think the sound work is really good. As a movie that's focusing on a deaf character that is regaining their sense of hearing should be. So a lot of the audio work in the movie is really well done. I think Lachlan Watson's performance, as I've mentioned, I think they're very good in the movie. I actually would like to see them in more things because this is the first thing I do believe that I've seen them in. And, you know, I think kind of its relationships with like the analog stuff is pretty interesting. And, you know, at first it seems to be like, oh, they're just doing this stupid style that it's kind of becoming a little bit overused. There is a reason, you know, as the story unveils itself that it's in there. So I wasn't like, oh, okay, it's just a movie using the analog style for style points, you know? There's actually a reason. But overall, it's very similar to the director's first movie that I think it's very poorly paced. And I think it's too slow, whereas in the other movie, the Beach House, kind of like the reveal, I guess, at around like an hour in kind of changes the movie. It winds up being, I think, almost like an alien invasion or like an infection. It's like completely weird compared to the first hour of the movie. This, once again, as we mentioned, it just kind of shows like, oh, they're regaining their hearing but hearing other things, and it's just it's not quite as interesting to me. I actually enjoyed the first hour more than the second hour, and I think it was because I was expecting a really big twist or payoff or something to happen about an hour in, and what they kind of revealed just kind of made me shrug. And I was kind of like, all right, you know, this was more or less what I expected. And, you know, it's kind of at certain points in the third act, I think gets a little bit too silly or too long. So yeah, it's one of those things that I think technically the movie is so good, but the rest of it, it's just like the script and the pacing and all that really lets it down, that it just makes it feel like quite boring. So for me, like, it's weird. I've been thinking about, you know, would I recommend it? And honestly, like, it has so many good things going for it that I should recommend it, but it's just so dull that I don't really know who I would recommend it to, right? It's like, hey, if you like boring movies, watch this one. You know, it's like, it's so, you know, it's not a bad movie, but it's just, it's so kind of dull and whatever that I'll probably forget it by this time next week. And I don't really know the sort of person I'd recommend it to. So I guess that's not a recommendation for me, even though technically it is good. It's just, you know, I don't know. It was just dull. I definitely felt like the pull to like be glancing at my phone like in the latter hour of the movie. I think I even sent you a message. I was like, oh my God, I got 41 minutes left. I feel like I've been watching this for 7 hours. It's a pacing thing. I think this director should really get like an editor that is a little bit more attuned to the sense of pacing, I think, or, you know, maybe release the reins a little bit and not like be so precious about keeping everything, because there's so many shots and scenes in this movie that I guess would be similar to something more like a mumblecore, where it's like, why is this in the movie other than to show like, this is life, this is, you know, this is their day-to-day life, or this is the pace of their day, or what other people are doing, which, you know, for a horror movie sometimes works, but in this case I think was a detriment overall for my viewing experience. So yeah, that's a recommendation from you, and I not a recommendation from me. So I think with that, it's probably time to cut to the spoiler discussion for The Unheard. We are now in our spoiler discussion for The Unheard, so if you've not seen The Unheard, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, you sort of alluded to in the spoiler-free discussion of some twists and turns in this movie, where basically for me, I felt like everything was spelled out, that there was no twist or no turns. So I'm curious, just what did you want to discuss, or what were you holding back on for the spoiler-filled discussion?
Well, to me, this is where I thought it was kind of weird, just with the marketing of it and everything, because, we mentioned that this is very analog. There's some, like, VHS stuff in there. We kind of get, as our lead character, Chloe, is, exploring her memories in the house and looking at videotapes of her mother, who, we don't know yet, for a long time into this, that she's actually murdered. We just know that she's missing.
Which is a weird detail to, like, kind of withhold from the audience, I think, that she was murdered or whatnot. Although I guess maybe Chloe doesn't know that she was murdered, but it's kind of like she talks about that period in her life where she goes into the coma for 6 months when she's 8 years old due to meningitis. And it's kind of like there probably would be details 13 years later or whatever it is on whether or not your mom is simply missing or if she's presumed dead and, likely murdered.
There'd be a Netflix true crime documentary made.
Yeah, exactly, right? She'd have her own miniseries.
So to me, like, the kind of twist of this is, as we explore this, I don't know if I would call it auditory hallucinations, because to me there's a lot of visual things going on here. Like the kind of creepiness of, that they're trying to convey in this is what she's, like, seeing on these VHS tapes. Yes, the sound is involved, but we're also kind of getting these, like, what we discover is her mother, like, trying to talk to her from
the other side.
The other side, but we're, like, we see it in these VHS tapes, and, like, she's kind of trying to get her message across by, kind of seeing her face in the static and all this stuff, which is very auditory also, but I was just kind of like, well, this is like more of a visual thing than it is an auditory thing.
Yeah, I guess in terms of just the blurb, it begins as an auditory hallucination, and they don't want to spoil, I guess, everything in the blurb, because, like, it's purely auditory in the beginning of hearing the noises beneath the floorboards and stuff, and drilling a hole through and all that sort of thing. And then eventually you start seeing images on the TVs and whatnot. I do think some of the strongest points of the movie are those visual effect sequences of, like, when they're showing, like, the analog film being distorted and changed and, like, revealing things. What I will say is sometimes I think it was a little bit too nebulous, like too hard to make out the audio or too hard to see, like, what was actually being shown.
I have no fucking idea what half the time what the mom was, like, what was being said. Just because the mixing or something, that, as they also had, like, all those noises.
It was so hard to make out, and you were listening with headphones. You even had a hard issue with it. I couldn't hear it at all on, like, my sound bar setup. Other than Happy 4th of July, of course, but that's because they kind of pump that through, like, near the end, right? They make that really forward, like, you can discern that easily from the rest of the mix. And then, I think that's the last line of the movie, right? I think Chloe says it, Happy 4th of July. But yeah, it was effective at times, but I don't know if it was ever, like, unnerving or scary or anything. I was just kind of like, I was kind of shrugging a lot at it. Like, it was cool, but, like, you mentioned Censor. I think Censor kind of did a lot of it a little bit better in terms of at least marrying it to its horror tone. Like, I found Censor a little bit more unnerving. I don't know if the visuals were actually as good as this. The visuals in this I just thought were really good, with kind of messing around with the tapes. Whereas Censor, I guess, was more like video nasty. Snuff films and whatnot. So it's a little different, I guess.
There were spots that I just were kind of weird to me. Kind of like you. I can't say I love, like, the Joshua character. Like, I thought it was a weird tone at first. I was like, oh, okay, this guy's kind of creepy, and we set up this obvious red herring where Hank is, be careful, Joshua, he's killing animals and stuff. But, like, to me, it got really, for a movie that was kind of, this mumblecore, real kind of, like, serious vibe, it got really silly to me when she like finds his hideout of like all the audio stuff.
That was really weird to me too.
I was getting like weird. I'm like, I don't know, is this like a Stranger Things knock? Like, what's going on here? It just felt like it was in a part of a totally different movie.
Yeah, I made a note that Josh just sitting on an evidence of contact to the spiritual world with audio visual stuff too, because there was distortions in like the windows and stuff.
Yeah.
And he just chooses to like use it as like a cool screensaver instead. He doesn't like upload it anywhere. He doesn't like, basically blow wide open this like paranormal science or anything like that. He just sits on it. He's like, yeah, that makes a sick screensaver. It's just like, I don't know. It was just really goofy reveal.
Hipster as fuck. He just wants, when it does blow up, he wants to be like, yeah, I heard it first. So,
yeah, it was such a strange thing. And for me, like, it's funny. You call him a red herring, and obviously he is supposed to be a red herring. But when you have an ex-cop in the movie who has like this interest in this young girl who's lurking around, and then he's the only one that tells Chloe about Josh's, he might have killed some dogs and whatnot, which is obviously an obvious nod to serial killers and how they like harm animals. It's kind of like, well, he's the only one who told her that, so obviously if he's the killer, it's a good way to kind of deflect the cast aspersions on somebody else. It was just so obvious to me. I was like, okay, when's Hank gonna be revealed to be the killer?
Yeah.
Also, putting a box cutter out like half an inch as your murder weapon is just like so lame. It sucks. It was just, I don't know. There were so many times in this movie where I was like, yeah, you can kill someone with half an inch of a box cutter put out, but also like all of the DNA is going to flood back into the handle of the box cutter. So if they ever find the murder weapon, you're fucked. And then in the third act, when he stabs Josh, it's supposed to be this big moment where he stabs Josh in the gut with like this half inch of a blade. And I was like, bro, you'd 100% survive getting stabbed by that. Then he even stabs him 4 or 5 more times, and I go like, you still might survive that though. Like, it's only a little small blade, It's so goofy. I don't know why they did him like that.
So this is where my kind of real issues with the movie was because I didn't overly hate Hank being the killer or anything like that.
But you weren't surprised by it, right?
No. I didn't think it was done effectively enough, because we do get these teases as she comes into this town that, women are just kind of going missing.
And you get one cutaway at one point to a missing woman that I was like, what is this part of the movie? Where, Hank takes her in the vehicle and slashes her throat. And then the blood goes all over the windshield and he still drives away, which is interesting. He must have been like peeking out through the one little aspect of the part of the windshield that had no blood on it.
This is where I kind of just thought, I was like, man, this really seems like an opportunity, because I know we can't know it's Hank. That's fine. But I was like, throughout the movie, why couldn't we have like a couple of these like women murdered and go missing, where it's like we get that one and that's all we get for 2 hours, just so we know, women are being murdered and missing. It was even the stuff, once we get the reveal that, Hank is got his sight set on her and brings her.
Killed her mother, yeah, which was an important detail, yeah.
We start to then, the last 10 minutes, we get this, Hank is hearing voices, like he's attuned to these for some reason. It seems he's attuned also to the other side, and he's, whether he actually is or he's crazy, I guess is up to you. But to me, we could have not revealed who he was, and throughout the movie been like, hey, this killer is like hearing stuff. Like, I feel like they should have been like, hey, this guy's a little unhinged, whoever this killer is, and this is how this killer is gonna like tie in to Chloe, and it would have been like this kind of this shared experience throughout the movie. But all we get is like just this information dump for like 30 seconds that like, Hank also hears voices, so he's crazy.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to figure out why that was. Like, I think it would have been more interesting if the killer had some sort of connection to like the analog as well. Like maybe he was recording his kills, because there is that one tape of him killing the mother. Like, obviously it would require a bit of a rewrite and you'd have to change some things, but it'd be a little bit more interesting if he was, just a more typical serial killer recording his kills to watch him back or whatever. But in that moment, the only thing I can really think of is that Chloe, when she was much younger, when she was 8, she came so close to death with the coma and stuff that she's, you're right on the border of being alive and dead, I guess. And then when he gets stabbed with the big kitchen knife in the back, it's kind of like, it is on the opposite side, I think, than his heart. But maybe it's like, the barrier between life and death has been worn away a bit. I don't know, but that's the thing. It's like you kind of got to make up your own rationale for why this works at the end. Either that or Chloe's mom becomes a straight up like poltergeist at the end of the movie and is like making legitimately loud noises through the analog and the lights and all that stuff, which I guess could also be an explanation. But I think it would have been a stronger ending if Chloe lost her hearing again, like, because it's kind of like coming in and out, and she's she's on the verge of losing her hearing by the end of the movie. And it would have made a better third act, I think, if she completely lost her hearing. And when kind of that poltergeist moment happened with all the noise and stuff, she was able to kind of push through it, and it didn't affect her because her hearing was gone, or temporarily lost or whatever. It just would have made more sense. I don't know why that wasn't brought in there, because her disability is treated like a disability all the time in this movie. It's never an ability or an adaptation that kind of like improves the character or the story, really. It's just something that they kind of get they throw away, and then they kind of flirt with the idea of her hearing being lost throughout the movie. But from what I understand, it's still there at the end. So I don't know. It's kind of like I just wanted some reasoning to kind of tie the analog horror to the killer, but also something to do with her hearing. Like there should have been a stronger instance at the end of her hearing or her deafness not being a disability or not, a negative inherently or something. There should have been something, I think.
I'm exactly on board with that. I think you just wrote a better ending for the movie. It's time for like, a Snyder cut, the Colton cut.
The Simpson cut coming out. Yeah, I'll get right on it. But yeah, the another thing in the movie that didn't really work for me either was kind of the quick turn with Chloe going after Dr. Lynch. In terms of like a romantic relationship. And I know she was drinking a little bit and whatnot, but it was a very weird moment to me when she comes on to Dr. Lynch back at the cabin. And maybe it was just, what you said it's Dr. Lynch's first time acting, but it was like a very like, you went out drinking with your patient, essentially. You both had multiple drinks. Now you're going back to her house. The social implication of going home with someone after drinking is that you're going to be romantically involved, or at least you're going to crash at their place, which Dr. Lynch had no intention of doing either. So it's just very strange. And then basically she starts attacking Chloe about her use of antidepressants. And it was a very strange moment in the script that I was like, why is all this happening at once? And then they use a flashbang sound effect to kind of like stun her, and she's like spinning around and shit. It's very goofy. I was just like, just a little bit more restraint on this moment. You could have made it tragic in multiple ways, either like the romantic aspect of like Chloe being embarrassed that she outed herself, like wanting to go after Dr. Lynch, or it could be like, oh, Dr. Lynch wasn't who you expected and she's kind of shaming you for your antidepressant use and kind of talking about how you ruined the study. But it kind of goes both, and then throws a flashbang into it and kind of just shrugs and goes like, Chloe's gonna go throw up now. It's very strange. It's a very goofy moment.
Yeah, well, I didn't get any of that because, she kept like freaking out because she's like, oh, you're on antidepressants, like this whole study's ruined now. And I'm like, well, like it still worked. Like you literally did something no one's ever done, which is like repair this hearing. But you're like, no, you're on antidepressants now. Now we're going to have to throw the whole thing away. No one's ever hearing again.
Yeah, I guess it's not technically a pure study because you don't put out, maybe the antidepressants had something to do with the process, and actually cause her to regain her hearing. It's kind of like you can't remove all the different, aspects, that are affecting the study. It's not like pure, but it's kind of like, you could also just account that it's like, yeah, it still worked. One person was on antidepressants. You don't think a 20-year-old that lost their hearing when they were 8 and seems to be pretty much a loner, like her father doesn't really care or come around at all, wouldn't be on antidepressants? Like, come on, that person would be on antidepressants.
Another kind of issue I had with it, which I feel might be a minor gripe if you're watching this. You might not really care, but, overall, I thought Lachlan Watson did a pretty good job. It's never easy depicting a deaf person when you're not deaf. But there was, they use kind of the crutch of this movie is she has this text-to-speech app. So she can read as people talk what they're saying, and I don't know. I feel like that's probably a real thing.
Oh yeah, that exists. Yeah, it's just like translation apps and stuff, right?
There was lots I don't want to do anything for you, Colton, that would suggest making this movie longer. But
oh no.
There was lots of times where they would talk and then she would immediately she wouldn't read what it said and would immediately talk back, and there just wasn't any kind of pause, even minute pause, because even people that read lips still process it for a millisecond, where this was you could kind of tell spots where she just kind of fucked up and reacted to what they said by talking back. And then I was just like, oh, this is weird. Because sometimes you have she has a huge pause and she's reading the screen, and other times she's reacting all of a sudden to what's being said or what's happening.
Yeah. And for me also, the movie does explain this, but I started writing a note of it right away that, Chloe is a deaf person since she's been 8 years old, and it's been 12 years, so now she's 20, and she speaks perfectly, absolutely perfectly, no degradation in her speaking abilities at all. The movie does say she sees a speech therapist quite often to get around that, but it was something that for me right away was a little bit goofy, right?
Yeah.
Because in a movie let's say Coda, which won Best Picture a year or two ago,
no big deal.
Yeah. No big deal. When a deaf person speaks, their speech is different, right? Because it's just the inflection in their voice. They don't hear other people speak, so it is different. You can make out what they're saying, but it's different. So it's just having, Lachlan Watson have a perfect voice for the movie. I understand that maybe they just had to do that. It'd be a little bit disrespectful if the actor was trying to, mimic that way of speech. But it was just something that I thought was a little bit of an oversight that was just weird to me when I was watching the movie as well. And it was something that basically the cadence at which Chloe would respond as well, I noted as well. That it was just off a little bit.
You would think there would be some volume issues, whether too low, too high, because if you can't hear yourself talk,
yes.
Well, and this was one of the things I thought was kind of weird. I guess, I don't know, is it woke Rowan in 2023? But to me, I keep saying, I really, really like Lachlan Watson. But to me, I thought it was kind of weird, because I was like, what an opportunity you could have that, get someone that's actually deaf in to star in a horror movie that would have brought some real authenticity to it.
Yeah, I guess the issue then becomes the second half of the movie where they have to hear, I guess, is the issue, right? You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You get a real person who's hard of hearing. They can't perform the latter half of the movie, because I was thinking the girl from A Quiet Place, is actually deaf, and she's great in both those movies, but putting her in this role, she probably would have issues with the latter half of the movie, right? So I guess that's kind of the issue.
We need twins.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
one deaf twin,
twins,
one
deaf. Yeah, wow. That's some stunt casting, I guess. It would be authentic, I suppose. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, I definitely saw how it wouldn't work in the end with all that stuff, and I'm sure it's kind of easier just to go with Lachlan Watson. I'm surprised that we've made it this on the podcast and you haven't roasted me for the fact that for some reason, the entire time I was hyping up this movie, I thought it was an Irish movie.
Oh, I think I forgot about that. This is definitely not an Irish
movie. Yeah, it's
movie.
definitely not an Irish movie. I told you 8 million times. I'm like, oh yeah, there's some Irish movie coming on Shudder, and where I thought that, I have no idea. I went back, I read everything I would have read, and I'm like, no, nowhere does this say. Maybe when I found out about it, my only excuse is when I found out about it, we must have been getting ready for Leprechaun.
Yeah.
And I was pumped. So every movie, I was just Irish movie. Yep, everything's going Irish.
No, definitely not an Irish movie. But yeah, I mean, I only have one more note I kind of want to get into. I guess that for someone who has been living for 12 years without hearing, they get the opportunity to get their hearing back. Their ears start bleeding from listening to a certain point on the floor. I would stop listening to the one point on the floor, I guess. The
rest
I would
of the
make
floor
sure
was
that
fine.
It was so well, not goofy, but it was just, for me personally, it's that's a big deal. I'm someone who I hurt my neck at the gym a few weeks ago, and I haven't been back since, just because of I want to make sure my neck is fully healed. Alone if I was literally broke my neck or something, right? literally, I'm just like, I understand the obsessive angle. I understand like wanting to discover what is this noise. But it's just, I don't know, dude. I don't think I'd keep going until like my ears were bleeding all the time and I was on the verge of losing my sense of hearing again. It's just, as a character, it felt very like dishonest to me, I guess, like not inauthentic, I guess. I can't see a real person doing that.
No, I'd agree with that, because there was definitely like, I was thinking, even though, it's exciting that they got their hearing back, I was thinking, would a real person, they're hearing things in the floor, are they like drilling holes in the floor and like, using a doll ass knife to rip up your carpet? And like,
yeah,
I was like, Chloe's like a little unhinged and we're not digging into this. Why? She's just automatically like, yup, I gotta tear this house apart.
Yeah, it's kind of like it happens because the movie needs it to happen. It's not like the character itself, like, realistically would do that. It's just like the movie needs some drama here, I guess. And that's the direction they chose to go, which, once again, just kind of goes back to my issues. I just don't know if the script is really up to snuff for how good Lachlan Watson is, and how technically good a lot of the rest of the movie is. But yeah, anything else you want to get to before we get into rating this thing?
No, I think I'm good. I think we talked about everything I had down.
Perfect. So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So Rowan, what would you give the Unheard?
This is a tough one. Like I said, I really did enjoy my viewing of it. And I enjoyed talking about it. But as I reflect, I mean, I came in fully ready to give it a yay because I did enjoy my viewing of it.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to give it like a strong okay. I'm just thinking of other movies I would have put, I've put it yay. And it's definitely something I think maybe later down the line I would revisit. But this isn't something I'm probably going to be grabbing all the time. I mean, simply for length, and I don't want to, waste my my youth, my that anything I have left of life. No, but it is a long one. I kind of wish that even like 20 minutes was shaved off of it. Like, I mean, really anything. I just think it's really long for the payoff. I think you could have done this pretty effectively in like an hour 30, hour 40, and I would have been, It would have been perfect. I would have been like awesome. Because even the flaws with that kind of time, I would have felt fine. Because like I said, you also talked about like, I mean, the issue is it looks awesome. It sounds awesome. Even the first little bit to me was fine. Like I could get into it, but if that payoff was there and then I'm like, all right, now we're done, then I would have been perfect with it. So yeah, I think I'm going to give it a strong okay. I respect the VHS vibes in it. I did enjoy that. I immediately thought of Censor, and I love Censor, so I was like, hey, it's giving me a good memory. I feel, maybe I probably grab for Censor before I'd grab this one.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
But yeah, I'll give it a strong okay. What about yourself? What would you rate it?
Yeah, I'm kind of just, repeating myself a bunch on this episode, but as I mentioned, it's competently made. It has great sound design, some neat analog video sequences, and Lachlan Watson, obviously, as we mentioned numerous times, they're great in this movie. But the script just leaves a lot to be desired. Like, I guess a lot of the dialogue for you kind of saw as a little bit more mumblecore. For me, it just seemed very simple and almost like everyone was speaking with no subtext. That it was just kind of awkward in a lot of places. And then the movie is just far too poorly paced. Even if they just move that inciting incident, like, where Chloe's hearing returns to like 40 minutes in the movie, I'd even be a little bit more to give it a pass on it. But it causes the whole movie to like not even start until 60 minutes in, really. Like it's just such an awkward decision. So yeah, I don't think it's a bad movie, but it's just a lot more boring than it should have been. So I'm gonna give it an okay. It is like a weak okay for me. To me, this winds up being more of a mediocre movie, just because lots of times when you see movies, you expect them to be competently made and like good lighting and good sound and good performances. So it's kind of just winds up being kind of some aspects elevated above what is mediocre, but then my issues with the script and the third act and just, I don't know, all these kind of what if ideas lingering around that I think could have been made it a much stronger movie, and I think aren't like great, unique ideas. They're kind of what I would expect people to come to when writing this movie. I think kind of bring it down a little bit in my mind. So yeah, it's an okay for me. And if you're new to the podcast and you happen to make it this far in and aren't following us on our socials, you can do so at It Slays Podcast. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Slasher, Letterboxd. If there's a social media, we're probably there at It Slays Podcast. And if you want to help support the show financially, like our horror hounds, Holly, Nicholas, Patrick, Mark, Steven, Joy, and Carvey, gain access to the Patreon exclusive show Stream Screams and get episodes of the main show 48 hours early, be sure to head on over to patreon.com/itslayspodcast and choose whatever tier works best for you. Now, Rowan, go ahead and plug the playlist.
Yeah, so if you're into spooky scores, spooky license music, and horror movies, go to the It Slays Podcast horrific playlist on Spotify. You can search it. If you have any problems finding it, you can also go to any of our social media, and in the link tree, there is a link directly to it, but we upload scores and licensed music from horror movies we review, or iconic horror movies, or just horror movies we love. So go check it out. Get your spooky music on.
And next time on the show, just looking at the release calendar, I assume it's probably going to be Renfield. Renfield and The Pope's Exorcist both come out on the same day, I think April 14th, if I'm not mistaken. So I assume we'll both be heading out to the theater that weekend to check out Renfield and The Pope's Exorcist.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Laugh at the accent that Russell Crowe is doing. Oh, man. And with that, I think that about wraps things up for this episode. So until next time, I'm Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And as long as you keep listening, we'll keep slaying.